Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unravel a massive mystery happening right above our heads. Every fall, the skies literally fill with billions of migrating birds. It's one of nature's absolute grandest movements. But here's the catch. The precise environmental clocks and wind patterns these species have relied on for thousands of years, well, they're undergoing a massive, incredibly rapid transformation because of a warming planet. It's literally rewriting the ancient rules of bird migration.
So let's dive into this bizarre phenomenon. Consider a bird called Richard's pipit. Historically, this species breeds in Siberia and then flies straight down to southern Asia to spend the winter. Makes sense, right? But recently, they're suddenly showing up in France and southern Europe. Back in the 80s and 90s, seeing one in Europe was incredibly rare. Today, it's actually becoming a common sight. You have to wonder, how does an entire population of birds just suddenly change its destination like that?
It turns out part of this shifting behavior ties into a really fascinating concept called Zugenruhe. Essentially, it's this hardwired, instinctive urge to migrate. It's a kind of deep restlessness triggered by the changing of the seasons. But our seasons are becoming way more unpredictable. Extended periods of warmth are creating these false summers, which end up delaying the bird's molting process, keeping insects around longer, and ultimately deeply confusing that fundamental migratory instinct.
To really grasp what's going on, we're going to break this explainer down into 4 quick parts: the shifting migration map, the phenological mismatch, genetic and cultural adaptation, and finally, how they're navigating the human threat.
Let's kick things off with part 1, the shifting migration map.
So looking at tracking data, it reveals that Richard's pipits are now moving on an east to west axis, instead of their usual north to south route. Why would they do that? Well, computer models that compare historical weather from the 1960s to the 90s against our more recent decades show that southern Europe is now a substantially warmer, way more suitable wintering location than it used to be. The changing climate has literally drawn them along a completely new axis across the globe. Now, scientists used to just write this kind of thing off as drift migration. The assumption was that young, inexperienced birds were simply getting blown off course by bad weather storms. But researchers noticed something striking when looking at over 300 photos of these pipits in Europe. The birds flying west are actually adults. So this isn't just an accidental drift by some confused juveniles. This is the active, intentional adoption of a brand new route.
And look, 50 years of data shows this is absolutely not an isolated event. Trans-Saharan birds like the willow warbler and the nightingale are drastically changing their internal clocks too. Because European vegetation is staying green for a lot longer, these birds are arriving in Africa later in the fall and then leaving earlier in the spring. Scientists actually project that if this trend continues, some species might just stop crossing the Sahara to overwinter in Africa entirely. That would wildly change global competition for resources among the resident European birds.
Which brings us to part 2, the phenological mismatch.
Basically, what happens when this shifting clock makes birds late for dinner? For migrating birds, timing is quite literally a matter of survival. Historically, their arrivals were perfectly synchronized with peak insect blooms. But because spring is warming up much earlier now, those insects are emerging and dying off sooner. So migrants, like the black-throated blue warbler in the eastern U.S., are experiencing what ecologists call a phenological mismatch. They arrive totally exhausted from a journey of thousands of miles, only to find empty branches. They're showing up to 10 days late for the peak caterpillar bloom they desperately need to refuel and survive. Imagine running a marathon and arriving to find the buffet is already empty.
Let's move on to part 3, genetic and cultural adaptation.
Faced with these absolutely massive challenges, you have to wonder, how are birds even surviving? It turns out they're adapting through some incredible, invisible biological and social mechanisms. While we often hear about phenotypic plasticity, which is basically just an animal changing its behavior based on the environment, recent rapid climate change has actually driven heritable genetic changes across totally diverse species in just a few decades. From the Yukon red squirrel to the pitcher plant mosquito and birds like the European blackcap, we are literally watching evolution happen right before our eyes.
When we look closely at these species, it's fascinating to see they aren't just adapting to raw heat. They are actually evolving to interpret changing seasonal cues. Mosquitoes, for example, are genetically shifting to use shorter day lengths to trigger their dormancy. Great tits are showing genetic variations that allow them to adjust their egg-laying dates to better match those early caterpillar blooms we talked about earlier. Basically, the animals that adapt their timing are the ones successfully passing on their genes.
But hey, adaptation isn't strictly genetic. It is highly cultural too. Tracking data of Caspian terns navigating their epic journey from northern Europe all the way down to Africa reveals something really incredible. Researchers attached these tiny solar-powered GPS trackers to family groups just to see exactly how naive young birds learn these massive flyways.
The GPS data proved something amazing. Adult males, both genetic and foster parents, essentially act as flight instructors. They fly side by side with the young, sharing the burden of a slower flight and spending a lot more time foraging at stopovers. And when those young birds grow up and make their very first solo migrations, they remain fiercely faithful to the exact same routes and stopover sites they visited with their dads. It's the literal cultural transmission of survival knowledge, passed down through generations.
Okay, our final section, Part 4, Navigating the Human Threat. We've seen how birds biologically and culturally adapt to climate and geography, but we really need to look at the direct human interventions that impact their survival every single night. You might not even realize it, but billions of birds migrate at night. It helps them avoid daytime predators and keeps them cool, and they naturally navigate using the stars. But our sprawling, brightly lit urban centers, they act as massive, deadly decoys. Artificial light and urban sky glow fatally disorient them. The birds get pulled completely off course, flying around wildly in confusion until they literally drop from sheer exhaustion.
To put the devastating scale of this into perspective, 400. In a single week back in 2017, nearly 400 migrating birds, warblers, grosbeaks, and others, were killed after getting caught in the floodlights of just one skyscraper in Texas. One single building. When you multiply that by every city in a major flyway, the impact is just staggering.
But the really good news here, and it's a very practical takeaway, is that we have an immediate solution at our fingertips. The Audubon Society's Lights Out program lays out 4 incredibly simple, cost-saving steps we can all take during migration seasons. Turn off your decorative lighting, downshield your exterior lights so they don't beam straight up into the sky, install motion sensors so lights are only on when you actually need them, and honestly, just close your window blinds at night. It is a tiny action, but it grants these birds safe passage. Beyond just the light switch, we need to build adaptive capacity for these species. That means actively protecting the physical stopover habitats, like the wetlands and forests where these exhausted birds desperately need to refuel. It means restoring ecological corridors so they have alternate routes when extreme weather forces them off track. And crucially, it means contributing your own local bird sightings to citizen science platforms like eBird or the EcoServants site. Your data directly helps scientists map these shifting timelines in real time.
Every single fall, the birds flying overhead are working through incredibly complex genetic shifts, cultural learning, and brutal physical endurance just to survive a world that we are changing. I really hope this explainer leaves you wondering, the next time you hear those night flight calls drifting through the darkness, what small role will you play to ensure their ancient journeys continue safely? Thanks for joining me today.